Let's dive deep into the details today. So let's break it all down together. This pattern we're in is one of the more active ones I've seen in a while. Over the next several weeks, we're going to see system after system impacting the Gulf, the southern US, and even extending their reach into the Caribbean. The setup we're dealing with is pulling in a mix of energy from different regions, creating a perfect storm of activity. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. Let's start with where all this energy is coming from. Right now, there's moisture being drawn in from Central America and the Pacific. You can see this flow feeding northward, creating a continuous stream of moisture that acts as fuel for the systems coming down from the north. Speaking of the north, we've got an active jet stream bringing systems from Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest. These systems are being funneled southeastward, combining with that Pacific moisture and creating these dynamic weather setups. What's especially interesting about this pattern is how it sets the stage for Arctic air to plunge southward. This Arctic air is originating, as you'd expect, from the far northern regions, the Arctic itself, and making its way into Canada before spilling down into the US. But there's like cold air is going to surge far enough south that it could brush the Caribbean. And that's something we don't see all the time, this kind of pattern where you get Arctic air and tropical moisture interacting is why we're seeing such an active weather stretch. Zooming in on the immediate impacts, there's a small system moving across parts of the Gulf in the southeastern US today. It's not a particularly strong system, but it is bringing rain to areas like Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama. This system will push off fairly quickly, but it's a sign of the active southern pattern we're in. Meanwhile, farther north, places like Ontario and Quebec in Canada are still dealing with lake effect snow, which is also extending into the Great Lakes region of the US. New England too is seeing some snow showers, and there's a larger system spinning just offshore in the Atlantic near Canada. That one's creating high seas and some gusty conditions along the Canadian coast. Now, let's shift our focus to the Caribbean. There's a weak front lingering near Puerto Rico, Antigua, Barbuda, and St. Kitts. This front isn't bringing much in terms of rain, but behind it, there's a noticeable flow of moisture streaming northward from the Pacific. This stream of moisture is essentially acting as a conveyor belt, feeding into the systems that will develop farther north over the Gulf and the southern US. This active pattern is only going to ramp up as we head toward the weekend. Later this week, we'll see a big front stretching from Bermuda down into the northern Caribbean and the Bahamas. Behind this front, cooler air will settle in briefly before a new surge of moisture moves up from the south. This back and forth between cooler and warmer air is what defines this pattern. By the weekend, the next big system will begin to take shape. This one will originate from Canada, pulling down Arctic air as it moves southward. At the same time, moisture from the Gulf will feed into this system, creating a significant front that's expected to bring widespread impact. For many in the US, this could be the coldest weather of the season so far. The northern side of the front will bring snow to areas farther north, while the southern edge could bring rain and cooler air all the way down into parts of the Caribbean. As we look into next week, the pattern becomes even more interesting. We could see snow in some southern locations, which is a testament to just how far south this Arctic air is expected to plunge. For places like Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, next week's front could bring a better chance of rain as it edges closer to the region. Let's talk more about the Caribbean specifically. Today, places like St. Lucia and Barbados might see a few spotty showers. These showers won't amount to much, but they're worth noting because they highlight the lingering moisture in the area. Dominica and the Grenadines could also get a few passing showers, but again, nothing widespread. As we move toward midweek, we'll see moisture building in the Gulf, and some of that could brush by the northern Bahamas and possibly Puerto Rico, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Rainfall amounts will generally be low, but isolated showers are possible. For Central America, the Pacific flow continues to bring isolated rain chances to Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. These rain chances remain fairly low, but they're worth keeping in mind if you're in the region. Northern Venezuela and Colombia will stay mostly dry, though isolated coastal showers could pop up. One thing to keep an eye on is the seas. With all these systems moving through, we're going to see choppy conditions in the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean. Waves will be building as the systems progress. So if you're planning any boating or fishing trips, make sure you're staying updated. By the weekend, the Atlantic waters in particular will be seeing much higher seas as the next big front takes shape. As we move even farther out in time into the following week, the pattern remains just as active. Another system will develop, bringing another round of Arctic air and the potential for snow in southern locations. This is shaping up to be a winter pattern unlike most, with cold fronts reaching farther south than usual and frequent systems moving through every 3 to 4 days. Top of the cold, we're also looking at some major snowstorm potential. Yes, even blizzards along the East Coast. These snowstorms could stretch all the way down to the southeast, so it's not just a northeastern or mid-Atlantic issue. This is a potential big deal for a lot of you who've been waiting for that heavy snow. Yesterday, we started seeing hints of this in the models, but now the GFS and European models are showing eerily similar setups for some major East Coast storms. These storms are still the ways out, but if they do verify, we're talking about some incredibly heavy snowfall. And here's the thing. It could be multiple storm systems. Some models are even hinting at 2, 3, or 4 major snowstorms over the next 2 weeks. So if you're a snow lover, this could be your time to shine. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of these storms, I wanted to ask you all something. I've been thinking about this lately, and I want to know your thoughts. Do you like it when I include the Climate Prediction Center setters up outlooks like the 6-10-day, 8-14-day, and the monthly outlooks in these videos? Or would you rather I skip them unless they're super relevant? The thing is, they do take a few minutes at the start of the video, so I want to know if you guys find them useful. After all, this channel is all about giving you the content you want, so your feedback really matters. Drop a comment below to let me know. Let's get back to the cold. If we take a look at the latest 6-10-day temperature outlook from the CPC, it's looking like we're in for some seriously cold weather. Just yesterday, the outlook didn't look too bad for the January 17th to 21st period, but the new model runs are showing that from January 18th to 22nd, things are going to get much colder. First, in fact, it's looking like one of the coldest stretches we've seen in quite a while, especially for the central US. And by January 20th, that cold air will start to spread further eastward, which could bring some major chills to the East Coast. Honestly, this is one of the coldest outlooks I've seen in a long time, and it's a major shift from what we've been seeing lately. This could even be a polar vortex event for some parts of the north central states with temperatures that could be historically cold compared to normal. It's not just a short-term cold snap. This is a prolonged stretch of cold air that could affect much of the country. But it's not just the cold we need to keep an eye on. When you pair that cold with the increased precipitation, it creates the perfect setup for heavy snowfall. The CPC is already forecasting above average precipitation, and it looks like we could see snowstorms forming, especially from the Gulf region. These storms would likely track up the East Coast, with some moving inland and others staying offshore. The ones that stay inland would bring more snow to the central and eastern parts of the US, while the ones that stay closer to the coast would bring heavier snowfall along the shoreline. This is the type of setup that snow lovers dream about: cold temperatures, plenty of moisture, and the perfect storm track. Now, as much as the first half of January has been cold, it hasn't been that stormy. The second half of the month, however, is shaping up to be much more active, with colder air moving in and above average precipitation continuing. We're looking at a very favorable pattern for snow. Not only that, but we're also seeing some dry spots, particularly in the Midwest. So we'll need to keep an eye on how that all plays out. But for the east and southeast, things are looking great for snow. Let's take a quick look at the 8-14-day outlook. This time period covers January 20th, 26th. And as expected, the cold will continue to spread eastward. By the time we hit January 20th, the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, and Great Lakes regions will likely be in the heart of the cold. The West Coast will see the warmest temperatures, but even those won't be that warm, especially compared to what we're seeing in the east. As far as precipitation goes, it looks like the Gulf will remain a key player for storm development. That's good news for those of you in the east and southeast, because it could mean more snow. Speaking of snow, there's a real possibility that we'll see a major snowstorm impact the southeast and mid-Atlantic from January 19th to 22nd. Both the GFS and European models are showing signs of this, and if it comes together, we could see massive snow totals in areas that typically don't see this much snow. This could even stretch into the deep south, with parts of Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi getting hit. It's still a little too early to lock anything in, but the ingredients are definitely there. As we get closer to the date, we'll have a better idea of how this might play out. For sides looking further out, the CPC's 3-4 week outlook gauge. January 25th to February 7th keeps the cold going in the east, especially in the southeast. The west, however, looks to stay warmer, and the dry conditions are expected to persist there. It's looking more and more like the east will remain the cold spot for the rest of January and into early February. Now, let's talk about the snowstorm potential in a little more detail. Both the GFS and European models are showing a big storm hitting the southeast and mid-Atlantic around January 1922. If this verifies, we could see some heavy snow from Texas to the Carolinas and all the way up into the mid-Atlantic. This could be one of those storms that just blows up out of nowhere, so make sure you're keeping an eye on it. The snowstorm could bring some much-needed snowfall to areas that have been lacking this winter. So keep your fingers crossed for a big event. But again, as much as we want to get excited, this is still a long-range forecast. It's always important to remember that models can and will change as we get closer. So while it looks promising, we're not quite at the point where we can say for sure that this storm will happen exactly as predicted. What I'm really keeping an eye on is how the storm could trend northward. That's a classic move with this kind of weather setup, especially with how the models tend to evolve over time. We've got a bit of time to figure this out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it shifts northward. People always ask, can anything happen? Well, yes, that's true, but it's not just guesswork. There's real data behind this, and we're confident there will be development in the Gulf. The big question is, where will it go from there? Will it stay offshore, hug the coast, or move onshore? It's still early, but the potential is certainly there. Thursday, the 23rd, I think we'll start seeing more activity in the Gulf. The jet stream is going to be in a perfect position to pull the storm through the southeast. This scenario could bring some ice to the deep south and even make its way up to the Smoky Mountains, where we might see some interior snowfall. And of course, with that frigid air coming down from Canada, we're talking about a pretty serious snowstorm before it moves out. Seriously, Adeline, looking ahead to Sunday, the 26th, this storm could really start ramping up, especially with that cold air diving southward, bringing some snowfall to the southeast and mid-Atlantic. And yes, we could see another storm in early February, so get ready for multiple snow events. Yeah, let's break down the models. The European model is showing a big storm for the southeast, with some snow moving from the Gulf through the southeast and up the coast. But the GFS is showing a similar trend, just with a slightly different take on the timing and intensity. The key here is that both models are in agreement that we're looking at snow for the southeast, but the exact details are still up in the air. As we go into the long-range forecast, the GFS model also has some interesting developments showing snowstorms for the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast around the 27th, 28th. The big concern here is severe weather, so we'll be watching for that too. Now, let's take a look at the precipitation. Both models show a pretty solid storm track through the southeast, which means multiple snow chances for these regions. However, we still need to fine-tune the details, how much snow will fall, where it will happen, and exactly when. If you're in the southeast, we're talking about 10 inches or more for places like Texas and Louisiana, with potentially up to 15, 20 inches for the Carolinas. In the mid-Atlantic, snow totals could reach 2 feet in some spots. Of course, this is all a bit speculative at the moment. The temperature pattern is also something to keep an eye on, especially with the European model predicting some really cold Arctic air to move in around the 19th, pushing temperatures 30, 40 degrees below normal in some places. That's some seriously cold stuff, and it could stick around for a while. But keep in mind, the GFS model is showing a slightly less intense cold front, so we'll see which model ends up being more accurate. Regardless of the details, one thing is for sure, we're in for an exciting winter ahead. We've got a lot of snow potential, and I can't wait to track it with all of you over the next few weeks. Be sure to subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.